can an atheist even ask the question or have a problem with evil in the world if their understanding is a naturalistic understanding that God doesn't exist? It's a, we came through evolution and those kinds of things, and there's just, like Dawkins said, just chance and randomness. And if you really think that that's the way the world is, then how can you even say something is evil? In other words, wouldn't the atheists have to define what evil is before they can even make an argument that it exists, and that it says that explains or that proves God isn't real? Well, I said that real convoluted. It sounded better in my head.
Yeah. So depending on the person you're talking to is going to depend how you kind of flesh out where you go from here. Again, let me implement the lazy approach. Another shameless plug for the book that'll be coming out.
Lazy.
I had an atheist once say that his biggest problem in believing in God is that there's so much evil and suffering in the world. And I said, why is that a problem? So my first objective is to get them to unpack why this is a problem to begin with. And he said, well, because God's all loving. I said, yes. And he said, and evil exists. I said, yes. He said, that shouldn't be. I said, why? And he just said, well, because God's all loving. Yes. And evil exists. Yes.
Right.
Where's the problem? So, and at one point he even said, well, you know what I'm trying to say. And I said, maybe I do. I think I do. But if this is your biggest problem to belief in God, then you should be able to articulate the issue, the underlying problem with this.
Right.
And because, again, what do most Christians do when they hear this? They'll start trying to give a defense.
Right.
But what are you defending if there's no problem presented yet? It's like saying the sky is blue and the grass is green.
Right.
Okay. What's the problem with that? Right. There's some underlying assumptions for why it's a problem.
Right.
The second thing that I'll go, again, depending on who I'm talking to, is, I may get them to define evil or see whether or not if they believe evil exists. Because on the one hand, they could be saying, I don't believe evil exists, but if there's a loving God, why is there evil? That's a fair question to ask. But if they're atheists and say, I don't believe in God and there's evil, then I think now you have a problem of evil, but it's a problem for the atheist worldview.
Right.
And this is for a few reasons. I did a debate against Robert Stanley.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Please. Yeah.
Because I know you're going to give the smart answer. Let me give you the dumb answer first, and you tell me what you think. Because for me, if an atheist doesn't believe God is real and this is all evolution and chance, then the only real things that there are states of affairs that you wish would obtain, and then states of affairs that you wish would not obtain. But there's no evil in either one of them. It's just you either like this or you don't. And what you're saying is how could there be a God if things are happening that I don't like happening, is what it kind of comes down to. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, very much so. So absolutely. So there's two in the debate I did with Robert Stanley. Have you seen that debate by chance?
I have not.
Okay. So I give a case in there. And whenever I talk about this issue, my two main points, put it this way. First, you can look at something like the moral argument, because these could be 3 arguments or 2 arguments, depending on how much time you want to take. But the moral argument essentially is that if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. But objective moral values and duties do exist, therefore God exists. Now, why is that the case? Again, without going into all the details, if when it comes to morality, it's either going to be objective or subjective, if it exists. If it is objective, it is universally true and binding, independent of human thought or opinion. If it is subjective, then it's the opposite. It is going to be dependent on human thought or opinion, and then it becomes just a matter of preference. So,
but is it even morality at that point?
It's subjective. That's the qualification. It's a subjective morality, just like there are subjective truths, right? There are objective truths and subjective truths. A subjective truth is based on what I think. It's my preference. If I say Taco Bell is the best food, which is what I think, then that's subjective to me. It's not universal or binding to anyone. But if I say the number 2 is even, that is an objective truth that applies across the board, and it's always been true. In other words, it wouldn't make sense to say that one day scientists will discover that in 100 years from now, the number 2 will cease to be even. Or you can't ask, when did the number 2 begin to be even? Because this is an eternal necessary truth. So things that are necessarily true aren't dependent on our conception or agreement or consensus upon them. It doesn't depend on location. The number two is still even if you're on the other side of the galaxy. So
Right.
subjective and objective. Now, if morality exists, I would say it's going to have to be objective.
Right.
Otherwise, if it's objective, it has no binding to it. And then you might even get into something like moral nihilism, where there is no good or evil at all. Now, the problem is here is if something is objective, morally speaking, then it's going to have to be grounded in something that is going to be able to be eternal and transcendent and beyond us. Why? Because if morality is objective, it can't be grounded in us. Why not? Because we're contingent. You know, the number two is even before we existed. It'll be even after we exist. When it comes to morality, same principle applies. So automatically, for there to be objective morality, you need something eternal, transcendent, beyond us. Sounds a lot like God. And then you can go into other features like moral values, moral truths. They have the properties of things like being loving or kind, loyal, justice. Now, these are all properties that belong to persons, not objects. So, and again, I'm giving you the short version. Then you would need something to ground it that's personal. And morality is also, ethics is a rational enterprise. So you need something that is rational, that is sentient. So you need something sentient, rational, eternal, necessary, and you can keep going down the list. And essentially, you're going to get to something like God, because moral values and duties and judgments are unlike anything else. There's a law of mathematics, but I have no obligation to it.
Right.
There's a law of gravity, but I have no obligation to it.
Right.
Morality entails a notion of having obligations, but obligations are things that are owed to someone, not to something per se. Yeah, please.
May I interject here?
Yes.
That's how I came to this idea that if morality is not objective, then it can't exist. Because now all you have are these subjective standards that are not binding to anybody. And if it's not binding, even if I think it's wrong, again, in a world, you know, an evolution will give an evolution and naturalism. It could be that the way the world is that whoever's stronger than the other person kills or dominates that person and takes their stuff. So I guess what I'm saying is, doesn't the idea of good and bad just disappear under that scenario, and it's just whatever is that makes it survive? I guess what I'm saying is, that's why when an atheist says, hey, how can there be a God with all this horrible stuff in the world, and they believe in naturalism and evolution, my question is well, what do you even call an evil? This just seems like you may not like it, but why should anybody else care if this is just some random, you know, conglomeration of atoms doing stuff? So that's what I'm saying is, I guess where I came to the idea that if morality is not objective, then what are we even talking about?
Yeah. Now, you know, to I guess what the other side would probably say, and would be fair for the most part for them to say, is that, okay, there's nothing objectively binding, but we can have social conventions and say, and it'd be a subjective thing that we hold people to. So, for example, driving on the right side of the road or the left side of the road. There's nothing morally objective about that, but subjectively, as a society, we have agreed to these rules in order to get along, if you will, in order to have some type of order.
So I agree with that part, and I get that, but my question is, are we calling that morality or just something to help us get along? Because at the same time, you could also say that, why should we even get along, right? Why shouldn't I just be able to drive where I want to? In other words, if there isn't this objective standard of what is right and what is wrong that is beyond us, it seems like whatever rules someone makes up that they like is okay, as long as they have the power to do it, you know,
to enforce it,
that
right?
Makes sense.
Yeah,
So while we do make societies that get along, and that's great, I don't know that we can call that moral. We can just call that we get along.
Yeah, right. So what's interesting about these things is that once people when you start trying to defend subjective morality, you're going to have to eventually even appeal to something objective, because like you said, okay, we're making these rules to get along, but why is getting along a good thing to begin with? Right. So it almost becomes a circular question begging.
Right.
So the other thing, so we can say that you need a standard, you need something to ground morality, an objective standard, and that God is the only thing that'll fit that description. So we'll say that much. The next thing I like to do is to kind of, if I'm doing just talking about evil, if evil exists, there's at least two things you're going to have to assume in order for evil to exist. The first is an objective standard of morality or goodness, and the second is teleology to life in the natural world. So
you lost me on that one. You lost me on that one. What?
Teleology to life in the natural world, and we'll unpack that.
Oh, purpose to life.
That's one way of putting it. Yeah, we'll unpack teleology.
I'm a dumb guy, Eric. You can't be throwing around those big words here. You don't watch out now.
Yeah. So I'll put it this way, because because you don't want to question big, right? And teleology is a legitimate notion that. Let me set that on the shelf right now. So the first, an objective standard of goodness. When I say someone is lying, I am automatically assuming that there is a truth from which they are deviating.
Right.
So the existence of a lie automatically presupposes the existence of truth. Now, note, there can be truth without lies, but there cannot be lies without truth. I would say evil is the same way. There can, if there is evil, then I am presupposing it is a deviation or a deprivation of a standard of goodness. So if a lie, so evil presupposes an objective standard of goodness, much like lies presuppose truth. Now, if there is no,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that was brilliant. You know, Dr. Craig says that when he talks, he says evil is a privation of good. And again, that's hard for my brain to pick up. But that idea that what did you say? Truth doesn't need the lie, but a lie needs truth. That's brilliant.
Right, to exist. Yeah,
that's a brilliant way to put it. Thanks for putting that.
I don't know if I came up with that or if I got that from Moreland. I'll have to go back and check. But
that was a good one. Yeah. I think Frank Turek has an idea. He says something about if you cut your finger, that's your finger's damaged. But if you remove the finger, you don't have the cut. But if you remove the cut, you still have the finger. Something like that.
Yeah, yeah. He also he has another one that shadows don't disprove the sunshine. Shadows need sunshine. So if there's shadows, then it requires a sunshine. You can have sunshine without shadows, but you can't have shadows without sunshine.
And just for the future, just for the future, those are the kind of examples I need. I need fingers, sunshine, stuff like that. This teleological thing, that's out of my league.
Well, yeah, we'll get to unpacking that next. So, so going back to the, so if there is evil, it's a deviation or deprivation from some standard or some goodness. Now, if there's no God, you can't have this. For some of the reasons we've already expressed, there's no objective standard. So we can really just modify the moral argument. And now the atheist has just given us a new premise. So going back to the moral argument, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. But the atheist says, but wait a minute, evil exists. Well, if evil exists, now we have a third premise. Well, then objective moral values and duties exist. And the conclusion is the same. Therefore, God exists. So the irony is that in order for an atheist to say there is no God because of evil, he first has to presuppose God's existence in order to try and use evil to prove that he doesn't exist. Right. So when an atheist asks me, or when an atheist objects by saying evil exists, I almost tongue in cheek, have to say, well, wait a minute. If evil exists and it's a deprivation of good and good is grounded in God, then before I answer your question, are you still an atheist? Because you can't have evil if there's no God. And if there's no God, then nothing's evil. So which one is it? You can't have your cake and eat it too.